Hello! Welcome to LVLS Weekly, episode 58. Apologize about skipping last weekend, but it turns out the Supreme Court is filled with 6 assholes who feel that women don't deserve equal rights and bodily autonomy. So I needed some time to rage. If you're like me and am genuinely pissed off about anyone who can get pregnant having their rights taken away, there's a whole bunch of links in the description to assist with finding a place that can help with abortions, as well as funding places that give abortions, because it is a fundamental right for anyone who can be pregnant to choose to have an abortion. Full stop. That should not be backpedaling. What the fuck? We're going to talk about Capcom Fighting Collection. And I got pickup. I got Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes Limited Edition from Europe, because Nintendo of America decided that it wasn't cool enough to do this like Japan and Europe did. So I imported it. Would have loved to have given Nintendo of America that money. This comes with a bunch of cool stuff along with the game. It's got a really nice box. I haven't really got into it yet, so let's dive on in. It comes with the game, as you can see up here, as well as this little packet of things. So let me open that up. And I believe these are character cards. Yeah, so there's Male Shez. And yeah, it's got character cards for everybody. So like there's Annette from Blue Lions. And let's find my absolute favorite character. There's Petra, Black Eagles. So it looks like the gang's all here, as well as both the Byleth and Sothis and the Ashen Wolves. Just cool little thing on top of that. It also comes with a cloth map of Fodlan. So there's the cloth map. Really well done. I'll probably hang that on my wall, because I don't actually have any Fire Emblem Three Houses representation up there yet. Then we have this box. I'm going to guess this is where the acrylic figures are hanging out. But you can see there's Edelgard there. And then it also came with Claude. And there's female Shez. So there's Male Shez there, which the ring light is making it really hard to see. And there's Dimitri. And Edelgard came out, so we'll go ahead and put her in her stand. So it comes with 5 stands that are named for everybody. There we go. We've got a miniature Edelgard figure. I still don't fully understand the appeal of acrylic figures. I think they're just cheap. That was not what I bought this edition for. I bought this edition for the cloth map and for the last thing I'm going to show you. And if you know me by now, you'll probably know what this is. It's the 3 Hopes art book. I'm not going to get too deep into here because there could be spoilers, so I think I'm going to actually just leave it in the plastic for the time being, because I have only played the demo for 2 of the houses, and that stops you really early. So I don't know anything, and people have been able to play it for a while, and I've been doing really good at avoiding spoilers, so I'm going to keep it that way. We have transpired some days since the beginning of the shoot to film the rest. Since then, I've gotten another item in the mail. This is the NES Endings Compendium, years 85 through 88 by Ray Esteban. Ray does a lot of work at the VG Museum, and I posted about this book at a forum that I go to, and I was like, since we're doing very similar work, trying to highlight aspects of the NES I wanted to support, finally got around to it. Book inside looks fantastic. Here's an example of the Stinger pages. Definitely evoking those old magazines, much like I was doing with Nintendo, but in a different approach. I have to say that the layouts are more complicated than mine. A lot more sprite work kind of peppered throughout the backgrounds and stuff, so it's a really nice looking book. And I flipped through and I got a whole bunch of fantastic suggestions for the minor character section in Nintendo 87. So it was worth it for that, because I probably wouldn't have looked at Rad Racer, for example, and realized that the ending has the girlfriend, quote unquote, stealing your car. Wouldn't have even thought about that. So that's actually going to be kind of a fun one to write, because it's cute. It's a different take on the usual. So that's really rad. So let's have a quick little cat intermission. We haven't done one of those in a couple weeks. And then we'll get to the featured item, which I actually have on hand for Hype Month finally. Capcom Fighting Collection is out. It's been out for a couple weeks, actually, by this point that I'm recording. I don't even know if I mentioned that I got it. So here, another pick. So in case you didn't know, Capcom Fighting Collection collects 10 games together for the first time. Some of these have never been released in America before, including Red Earth in terms of a console release. Red Earth actually had an extremely limited North American arcade release, so one could truly argue that it's the first time it's been released with any degree of saturation. On top of that, we get Vampire Savior 2 and Vampire Hunter 2. These have not been released, I believe, on console before. I think they were part of the PSP Darkstalkers Chronicle, Vampire Chronicle, I forget what they called that one. But first time they've been released on console. On top of those, you get the other three Darkstalkers games. Hyper Street Fighter 2, which hasn't been re-released since the PS2 Xbox days. Super Gym Fighter Mini Mix, which is aka Pocket Fighter, which hasn't been re-released since the PS2. Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, which I don't even know the last time it's been released in its original format, because it's been released in an HD remix a couple of times since then. But this is the original. And then Cyberbots, jumping from Capcom Arcade Stadium onto here. So I've experienced with most of these games in the past. The only ones I hadn't really played are the two extra Darkstalkers games, which I dabble with a little bit beforehand. Red Earth, which I played through with 2 characters, and Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, which I have not played because I'm not a fan of puzzle games. But I have watched plenty of people play it, so I think I have an opinion, even if it's not as informed as it could be. So what I'm going to do is I want to talk about these in a little bit more detail, but I actually want to show you what these games are while I'm doing that. So, boom, the magic of transition. This is the title screen for Capcom Fighting Collection. Now, one of these days, I will invest in getting a capture card so I can do this myself instead of having to constantly rely on other people's videos to do it for me. That'll be a nice day. It is not this day. So I am borrowing Matt McMuscle's Flophouse Plays channel's video on it since he covers all of the games. So there might be a bit of his goofiness in there. I will put a link to his original video in the description as well if you want to watch it, but it's a really good overview. Like, it's over an hour, so he gets into all of the games. So one thing about Capcom Fighting Collection, before we get into any of the games, is I do want to point out that what I was suggesting, the approach Capcom was having with Fighting Collection versus Arcade Stadium 2 was pretty accurate. That Arcade Stadium 2 is meant to be more of a cursory, like, examination of their arcade catalog. It has all of the games, but you can't go online with them, but it does have score attack and stuff like that. It's trying to replicate the arcade experience without, you know, getting fanciful, I guess is the best way I could describe it. Fighting Collection, on the other hand, is the opposite. It is a very well curated list of games with a bunch of bonus features, online play with rollback in that code for all 10 games, which is the first time Capcom has gone to that length of attention and detail in a collection like this. The Capcom Beat 'em Up Bundle was the first attempt to do that, and the online wasn't there. But otherwise, it's a similar approach that we have a bunch of art, we have a bunch of music. The cool thing about Fighting Collection is that it actually does collect various versions of the boards on top of regional differences, so you can play the various versions of, like, Darkstalkers 3, for example. And I'm not even talking about Vampire Savior 2 in this case. I'm just talking, generally speaking, that there are different versions. And then you can also switch. So you can play Red Earth, or you can play Warzerd, which is such a cooler name. So I'll go ahead and play this so we can kind of see the menu. They got Honest Trailer guy, John Bailey, I want to say his name is, to do voiceover on this, which is pretty neat. There's an award system, so it's basically achievements, even on the Switch, which doesn't normally have achievements. The museum is pretty dense. There's lots and lots and lots of art and music to check out. I will say thank you, Capcom, for releasing this collection, because it is probably, out of all of the compilations that Capcom has put out, one of the absolute nicest ones that they have done. I think it's also one of the most feature-rich. Like I said, you can switch between the various localized versions, or you can go between various versions that are on here. You can adjust the settings. So for example, if you want to play Red Earth, but you don't want to go through the RPG leveling up system that they added to it, you can make your character level 32 in the menu, and then just jump right in. You'll have all the moves available to you and all the perks and bonuses that comes with it. Or you can choose to play through Red Earth and earn that, and then enter your password to continue building up that character. So it's pretty neat. The features are really nice in this set. So let's jump into Red Earth proper. So this is the character select screen. Now, Red Earth is a unique game. It is the first game that Capcom used the CPS-3 board on, and you'll see it in the animation quality. It's really, really, really nice. All of the games also have a training mode, so you'll be able to try out characters and see how the game mechanics work in all 10 games, which these are arcade games originally. They don't have training modes, so that was extra work to make this happen, which is really nice. But you can see here how nice this game looks. Matt does have a filter on here. I usually play without a filter on, but this is probably the best scanline filter, and it does a good job of recapturing that CRT look of these games pretty well. You have move lists for all of the characters in all of the games, so you can understand how it all works. And you can see here that there's levels for Red Earth that you have to reach to unlock things. And Matt's starting out at level 1, so he doesn't have access to the majority of Kenji's moveset in his training experience. And the Mystic Orbs are basically how supers work in this game. So when you start out in Red Earth, you only have like 2 special moves, 1 super move, and then your normals. But you can gain extra abilities. Like, I think Kenji gains a second hop, for example. Your attack can go up, your defense can go up, along with getting new moves and additional features that you don't have otherwise. These 4 characters are all very unique from each other, so they don't play similarly at all. Leo has incredible range with his super big weapons and has armor on several of his special moves, while Tessa has a ton of projectiles as well as means of punishing opponents with various types of attacks that hover around and stick around for a while. For example, her ghosts will continue to attack if they successfully connect in the first place. But I came away from my 2 playthroughs of Warzard as Tessa and Maylene really impressed with this game. And it's not your conventional fighting game by any stretch of the imagination. Playing it in 2-player is almost more limiting than playing it in single player, because it just has less going on for 2 players, because you can only pick the 4 default characters. You can't pick any of the bosses. When you play the core single player game, it's only bosses you fight. So it's a really fascinating game. Definitely one of Capcom's more unique entries in their fighting history, and it's such a wonderful thing to see it here. Let's show one of the fights with the boss real quick so you can see what that looks like. So this is Hydron. But you can see like the camera zooms in and out as you fight and you get knocked further back. So it does give you a little bit of range. But you can see what I mean about, like, Kenji has a lot of moves that have like this mid-range. But it's just a super cool game, and there's the experience. And then treasure chests show up. And if you open those, you'll get either health, or you'll get experience, or you'll get a mystic orb to do another super move. But it's kind of like you just learn how to get through the boss's patterns to beat them. And there's even like fatalities of sorts against the bosses with bladed attacks. If you finish them off with like Tessa's Dragon Punch motion, or probably with a lot of Leo's attacks, the character will split in half. Which is wild for a Capcom game. You usually don't see that level of violence in one, but Red Earth has it. Just a really cool game, ultimately, and you'll just continue going through it, fighting bosses. I think there's 8 in total that you have to go through to get through a core game, and it levels you up by, at least when you're starting off, like to level 8. And then I'm sure you'd probably have to play through it probably good another 10 times to get to level 32. But there's story that goes along. It's not the most sensible story, but there's story to kind of get you to continue going through. So there's little cutscenes. Some of these cutscenes have decisions that you get to make, which is kind of neat too, and that changes the path that you go on. And yeah, here's the level up screen. So in this case, Kenji got level 3, earned a new title, learned a new move. It tells you what the move is. It's neat. It's a cool game. All right, let's move to the Darkstalkers piece, since that's the largest component of this collection. 5 of the 10 games are Darkstalkers games. And Darkstalkers is clearly an important franchise to Capcom, but it has never like earned the financial sales clout a la Street Fighter to be more than just this short-lived 90s series with 5 entries and continued cameos in like versus series games or elsewhere. Will we see a new Darkstalkers game done in 3D a la Street Fighter 6? That I don't know, don't anticipate. But at the very least, we now have access to 5 Darkstalkers fighters that really show off how important this series was to Capcom in terms of their development of these types of games. Because if you look at Darkstalkers, a lot of the things that went into the Versus series ended up part of they were originally in Darkstalkers. The animation quality is really high. These are CPS2 games, but look beyond anything that the original CPS2 board seemed capable of. Just incredible animation. And some of Capcom's strongest art design is in Darkstalkers, in my opinion, along with like the Breath of Fire games. Just really unique and organic concepts of these classic movie monster motifs taken to like in the Capcom art house style. It's just such a beautiful series of games that play really fascinatingly. And when you think about these games kind of being the origin point of the Versus series in a lot of ways, because of the way that things chain together, the way that things can connect, it feels really important to the legacy of Capcom as a whole that these games are here, that these games are being recognized for what they are. You have off the ground attacks in this game. You can actually jump and do attacks on a downed opponent. And again, weird levels of violence for a Capcom game, as you can split opponents in half with certain characters. When people think of Darkstalkers now, they often think of Morgan or Felicia, but there's so much more to this series than those characters. And I'm glad that we have this opportunity to experience them all with online play, with all of the art that you can see, the development of these games, and just get to appreciate them on a much deeper level than we've ever had the opportunity to before in North America. It's fantastic. Alright, we are in Cyberbots territory. Cyberbots is connected to the same series as Armored Warriors. Armored Warriors is actually one of my favorite Capcom beat-em-ups, and while Cyberbots doesn't quite land as well as Armored Warriors did for me as a fighting game, it does do a fantastic job of transforming the mecha anime that's so desperately trying to capture into a fighting game, and it does it fairly well. I feel like the mechs are a little bit more limited in their options and their ability to chain things together. I think my hope would be that this would play more like Darkstalkers or the Versus series than Street Fighter 2, but it definitely is more like a Street Fighter game than the Darkstalkers or Versus games. One of the cool things about this is you can see that the arm is glowing on the mech on the right. You can knock off your opponent's arms in combat, which limits what they can do moving forward. The stages also have some interactivity. You saw that the power lines went down once the mechs went through it. Another thing about this game that I wish had a little bit more going on with it is that it only has one super move per mech option. And while there are a variety of mech options in this game, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of variety, which is weird. It's a weird contrast. This also has some of the most air mobility in a Capcom fighter as of this point. But you can see like you can pick different model types depending on I think there's 12 in total, and then you get to pick from 6 different pilots. There is some story to make it a little bit more anime. You can see the Techromancer influence, why Techromancer exists and takes this concept to a 3D arena fighter space, which I think is even better than what Cyberbots does. But this is a good game. The nice thing about this collection is there is not a bad game to be had here. All 10 are solid. And while I wish there was a bit more to Cyberbots than what there is, and that it played a little bit more like a versus game than a Street Fighter game, it's still fun, and it still looks fantastic. And once you get into its mechanics a little bit, I think you will have a really good time, especially if you are into the mecha subgenre of anime. Hyper Street Fighter 2 is an interesting game. As Matt's showing off here, it originally appeared in Street Fighter Anniversary Collection. You can pick between the 5 versions of Street Fighter 2 for your character type. However, there isn't a normal version of Cammy, for example. So if you pick normal, you'll only be stuck with the original 8 World Warriors. If you go into Champion or Turbo, you'll get the 4 bosses. And if you go into Super Turbo, you'll get the new challengers. What I have observed, generally speaking, is that when you fight the AI, they almost always pick Super Turbo as your fighter. But when you're playing online, you'll have a lot more options because you can pick between 5 versions of Ryu, for example. And you'll get the Super 2 backgrounds or Super Turbo backgrounds, and it's just, in terms of Street Fighter 2, outside of Ultra Street Fighter 2 on the Switch, this is probably the most feature-rich version of the game. And it is definitely hard. It still seems to have the Super Turbo, like, max difficulty on, even if you adjust the difficulty down. I didn't get very far when I revisited it after 15, 20 years of my last playing it. But if you enjoy Street Fighter 2, this is probably the best way to experience it, especially if you're going to play it in any way competitively. Because it's just so broad. There's so much that you can potentially do with this game. Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo. Here we are, the game I have not played because my puzzle expertise is more in like Sega Swirl Land or Bust-A-Move Magical Drop Land or Cleopatra Fortune. I like Taito puzzlers, apparently. But this is a very nice take on the drop-down puzzler, and it works so differently than most others that I might actually get into it if I give it a shot. So how this works is you drop gems down. You have a column up at the top there where there's a space. And that space where the gems drop in is where you don't want to have the gems climb to. They can climb in those other areas, but if they climb up into where they drop, that means you lose. And as you play, you definitely want to think ahead about how best to drop a whole bunch of stuff onto your opponent. Because if you don't, you're going to end up in situations where you'll be in caution or warning really quick. So there's a lot of strategy involved with this game. Unfortunately, there are characters that are very, very high tier that work really well in this game. And you'll just see like Donovan just had a super successful chain there. And there you go. Yeah, so you have to be really careful in this game because it actually benefits you as a player to have a whole bunch of stuff on your board and then try to clear out a bunch of it at once. It's a risk-reward system. But as I was starting to say, Ken's really good. He's the top-tier character, so a lot of people online will probably be playing as him. This is Pocket Fighter. We'll switch into that since I don't actually have a whole lot more to say on Puzzle Fighter other than it looks fun for fans of that type of genre. Basically a sequel to Puzzle Fighter. They started with Puzzle Fighter and then they were like, well, we made all these cute chibi sprites. Why don't we do something more with them and actually make a fighting game? So they brought the majority of the Puzzle Fighter sprites in. Poor Donovan sat out. And then they added some more characters into this. So you get... Here, we'll pause here for a second so we can talk about the roster. You get Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li and Sakura from Puzzle Fighter, along with Zengi Ibuki joining officially. You'll also get Dan and Akuma, who were hidden in Puzzle Fighter. They're also hidden here. They're off to the left and the right of Ryu and Ken. From Darkstalkers, we get Morgan, Heisenko, and Felicia, all of whom were in Puzzle Fighter, if my memory is correct. And then Tessa from Red Earth Warzard joins up as well. So this is so far, outside of Capcom Fighting Evolution, which is basically Capcom attempting to do Mugen and failing at it, the closest we've ever had to a Capcom versus Capcom game. Because you have 3 franchises coming together to fight each other in a fighting game. And honestly, Fighting Evolution didn't do much better. It was still the same 3 franchises, just with an even bigger proliferation of Street Fighter characters than this one has. For some reason, Donovan was axed. I don't know why, if they decided to cut him. Maybe they ran out of time before they could add him in. But they did at least add in 3 other characters that are all really interesting. And the cool thing about Pocket Fighter, now that we've been sitting on this screen for a while, let me get to some actual gameplay, is that it doesn't play the same as most Capcom fighting games. It plays like Pocket Fighter is a hybrid of Darkstalkers and Puzzle Fighter and Red Earth. So it's basically like all of the stuff comes together. There's chain combos like Darkstalkers. You level up moves like you do in Red Earth. But you can also throw items. And you have these transformation combos. So, and then there's cute little references to other Capcom games all over the place, like Chun-Li passing away like Arthur does in Ghouls and Ghosts. Or doing, I think that's the Sun death animation. Sun, speaking of Sun and other characters from that series show up at the top. If you hit them, you'll get treasure chests. But here's some transformation stuff, like Ibuki will transform into a penguin, as well as a bunch of other like really Japanese references. Chun-Li's got some of the best in the game, as with Felicia. They have some of the heaviest references in terms of referencing Capcom stuff. So like Chun-Li turns into Jill Valentine and June from Star Gladiator, while Felicia turns into Mega Man and other Darkstalkers characters. It's just a really cute game. It's not as in-depth as other games, and the chibi sizes can make hitboxes really weird. And it's also really reliant on the experience system to do a lot of damage. But it's a really cool game with a lot of really cute references, and I would love to see Capcom do another Pocket Fighter. I think it would be a really cool game to come back to with a sequel, since they've added so many characters and they can expand beyond Street Fighter, Darkstalkers, and Red Earth and make it a much broader selection of characters. Or we could just get Capcom versus Capcom already. We'll end this video with just Matt going through some of the super rad museum stuff. Right now, he's going through the Red Earth Gallery. I really wish Mei Ling had pants. For some reason, she doesn't wear pants. I don't understand it. But I do think Tess is the strongest design out of the 4. And then here's all the bosses. But this is a great collection. And my hope is that when you're thinking about buying this, that if you are into fighting games and you want to play online and you want to have all of this archival material and the presentation is top notch. I didn't even say, like, they got Cap Jams to do a bunch of original music for the menus. That's all really good. It's like the production values went into this collection. It's meant to really highlight the importance of these games to Capcom's legacy. And they have done that. And I was a little cynical when Arcade Stadium 2 announced that 8 of the games that are on here, or 7 of the games that are on here, are also appearing in that. I was a little cynical about it, but now I think I understand what they were going for. And what they were going for here is this is the premium way to experience an important piece of Capcom's history. In Arcade Stadium 2 and the original Arcade Stadium, they are intended to be an overview of Capcom's overall arcade experiences from the 80s through the 90s. It is not intended to be like a be-all, end-all collection that really puts the spotlight on that period, on a specific period or a specific genre. So, in the end, I understand what Capcom's doing. I just hope it doesn't bite them in the butt in the future. I really hope that this sells fairly well because it deserves to, and that Arcade Stadium 2 sells well because it's doing a different approach, doing its own thing. For now, we will end Hype Month with Capcom Fighting Collection. I want to give a huge thanks to Flophouse Plays for letting me use their video for the Capcom Fighting Collection piece of actually showing off the games. Someday I'll have a capture card. But for now, I hope you have a wonderful week. Take care.